guys, it's Sam, and this is my March wrap-up. I read 7 books in March, which is more than I thought that I did, and I enjoyed most of them, which I didn't even realize until I was writing everything down. So let's just get into it. The first book that I picked up was the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. I've done a full review on this book, which I will link on the screen. I have been meaning to read this series for a long time now, and been meaning to get into N.K. Jemisin for a very long time, so it was the perfect excuse for me to finally pick her stuff up, and I'm so glad that I did. This book did take me a little while to get into, but it definitely paid off in the end. This is the first book in a trilogy. It's an adult trilogy, and it's a fantasy post-apocalyptic, so the world kind of ends a lot over the times. Like, things called seasons happen, and that's where the earth becomes just really, really dangerous. But the world is like officially really ending this time because something cataclysmic has happened. And there's also a big focus on oppression and systematic oppression because the magic users in this world are all related around like earth magic and controlling like seismic movements and stuff. And there's this whole focus on them. So this is a 3 different perspective book that follows 3 female characters and just everything that's going on in their lives. One's a young girl, one's a kind of young adult, she's in her mid-20s, and one is an adult woman whose child has just been murdered by her husband because he found out that the child was one of these magic users, and she's one of these magic users. And you follow them, and it's just so good. Like, it does take a while to get into. It kind of throws you into the story as far as the world building, but it's beautifully written. And at the end, like, it is one of those foundational books that just sets everything up for the rest of the series, and by the end I'm just like, I want to ride into battle. Like, it's so good. And the female characters in here are pretty much like the focal point. There are male characters, but like the female characters are amazing, and there's so many different kinds of love depicted in here, and there's a polyamorous relationship that it just like, oh my god. And it's so wonderful, and the magic system is just like so kind of complex. I don't even really still know how it works, but it's like just, it's beautiful. And I am sad that it took me so long to get into her books, but this series is just like gorgeous. The second book, The Obelisk Gate, is nominated for a BookTube SFF Award Best Novel for this year, so that's why I read this book, and I'm so excited to read that one because I think that one is just going to be mind-blowing. This one was really good. It still had some flaws, like I said, because it took a little bit to get into, but I highly recommend it, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I then picked up Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. This is another BookTube SFF Award nominee for the short fiction category, because this is a novella, and this is a wonderful, magical, whimsical story that's about children who are sort of the victims of portal fantasy. So portal fantasy is when, you know, kids like go through a doorway and end up in another world. And this is a school for those children who have come back to this world and kind of don't know how to cope with that and really do want to go back. So it's all of these kids in this school that have been to different worlds, and it's not necessarily based on any like Narnia or any of the books that like we know about, but it definitely plays with those tropes and like fairyland and all of those kinds of things, and kind of has like a system for it. And it's so cool. There is also like a mystery element that starts happening later on in the story, like halfway through, which kind of throws off the book a little bit, and one of the reasons why I didn't ultimately give it 5 stars. But I love portal fantasies. Like, there's something about them that feels just so nostalgic, even though I didn't read a ton of them when I was younger. Like, I never read like Narnia or anything like that. But something about portal fantasy just like pulls in my heartstrings, and all of these different worlds that we get to hear about, and all these kids that went to these different places, and how they kind of coped, even though we get like small snippets of it, is so cool. One of the only things that I think would have really benefited the story is if it was longer. I would have loved it to actually be like a full-size novel, and we get to learn like the backstories of all of these different kind of worlds. This is going to be a companion series, so we will get snippets of some of the worlds in later novellas, but ultimately I would have liked just like a large normal-sized book. Normal novel that just went into everything and really had a lot of backstory and really like just went into all of it, because it left me really wanting more. And I feel like even that little mystery element that pops in later wasn't that necessary. I found it a little bit predictable, but the like world building parts of it, and just like the characters and stuff, and the stuff about the different kinds of worlds and how they're broken down almost scientifically, was so cool. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I then listened to The Golem and the Jinni by Helene Becker. I've done a full review on this one. This is one I actually listened to on audiobook over the course of about a month or so, and this story is so beautiful, and one that I've had on my shelf for a while because I've heard it recommended to people who love the Night Circus, and I completely agree. This is a historical fantasy that takes place in New York City around the turn of the century, and it follows a golem and a Jinni in their various societies, kind of learning how to cope with their new realities, because they've both been stuck in New York City where they don't really know what to do, they're not really used to it, and kind of how they learn to become their own individuals within this society that doesn't really understand magic or know that it exists. It's one of those stories where magic is right around the corner, but it's not a part of everyone's everyday life, and you kind of have to look into those dark alleys to find it. It's one of those stories, and I really loved it. It's not a romance. If you go into this looking for a romance, that's not really what you're going to get. There are small snippets of romance in this story, but that's not what I would recommend it for. It really is about the two people as individuals, learning from their environments, and then ultimately learning and growing with each other as friends as well, and it's just stunning. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I highly recommend the audiobook. The narrator is amazing. I then picked up When Diplomat Rishi by Sanya Menon. This is a YA contemporary story that I've also already done a full review on, so I'll link that on the screen. This one comes out in May, and it's a very cute contemporary story about 2 Indian American teens who are going to the same web development camp over the summer. The girl, Dimple, thinks that she's going just to go because she wants to do this for her career. She's very excited about it. But she ultimately is being set up in an arranged marriage with the male character Rishi, and he knows about it. So, but he doesn't know that she doesn't know about it. And it's kind of one of those cute little situations, little cute contemporary stories. So they end up meeting up at this camp, and everything kind of takes off from there. I thought it was really cute. I am not really drawn to YA contemporary much these days, but this one was a really cute story, like instantly adorable and just like a fun summer, it's like a summer camp, except for they're not camping, they're just in San Francisco type story. It's adorable. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then after that sea of hits, I had to kind of take a little bit of a dip because that's what happens with your reading, and I read 9 Foxx Gambit by Yoon Ha Lee. This is also one of the BookTube SFF Award nominees for this year, and I've been really looking forward to this one. This is a adult science fiction, and I would categorize it as hard sci-fi. It's a lot. I can't even really describe what it's about. It's about a starship captain who is in this world where everything's kind of based around math. Like, the reality is different than our reality. Like, everything is based on like a calendar and is very extremely mathematical, and if everything gets thrown off, if the numbers get thrown off, the world gets thrown into disarray. So she's disgraced, and she's going to be mentally fused with an undead Captain General from the past that went crazy and killed everybody in his like platoon or whatever. So she's being mentally fused with him to win this battle coming up like against the heretics who are throwing the calendar to disarray. Does it sound confusing to you? It's because it is. This was a slog for me. It's a fairly short book, but it took me a while to get into the writing style. I eventually did, but there was a lot of times where I was rereading paragraphs, or I would just start to just kind of check out because I just couldn't focus on what was happening. It's also very battle heavy, and it's battle heavy in a way that is hard to kind of follow because the reality is different. So it's not even just like, oh, starships, pew pew, like, it's like, I don't know what's happening. Like, that's how extreme it is, and there's really horrific things that are happening because it's war. Like, there's parts where people's bodies are being like torn apart, and I couldn't even really follow like what is happening. That's how extreme it was. And I really did like a lot of the dialogue stuff between the two characters, between the undead general and between the starship captain. When that stuff was happening, it was fine, but it was a lot of plotting battles and following battles and strategy in a world that I just could not wrap my mind around. I've heard this is a book people either love or hate. A lot of people were like, oh, just push through and you get to the end and it's so whimsical and just eccentric and it's weird and it's supposed to be weird. And I was like, I can't wrap my mind around this. It's not fun for me. So this is a book that you just have to kind of go in and be like, how am I going to feel about this? Because it can really go either way, and it's not a book that you're going to really feel in the middle about. You're either going to love it or just really hate it and not get it. I gave this one 2 out of 5 stars. I do have a review coming up for that on Monday, which hopefully will explain things a little bit better since I reviewed it right after I read it, but also like it's just a really confusing book for me. I then listened to The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman. This is the second book in the His Dark Materials trilogy, and a lot of people know about this because it's a very famous trilogy, but it's not one that I ever read when I was younger, and I've kind of struggled with this series. I read The Golden Compass a couple of years ago, just in physical copy, and just couldn't really connect to it, and I feel the same way about this second book. I liked the second book a little bit more, I think, than the first book, but it's a little different because it turns into more of a science fiction than a fantasy. The first book is more very fantasy focused, it's in a fantasy world. The second book is more of a portal fantasy, and you actually come into Earth in the second book. And it becomes almost science fiction-y in a way. And it kind of fuses those things together, which is really cool, but at the same time, I struggle with it for some reason. It's just not something that I connect to as much. I thought the audiobook was really good, and I'm going to continue the series on audio. This was a full cast. It was narrated by Philip Pullman, and then it had a full cast for all the characters, which was really cool. And I really like that this is a story that's it's a middle grade kind of story, but there's a lot of adults in it. So it's not as though the kids are just off like saving the world completely by themselves. They have a lot of support from the adults, which is really cool. And it is really focused on religion as well. I really like fantasies and science fictions that have religion in them as an element, and this one definitely does. It is controversial for that reason. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the controversy around like the anti-religious elements of this story. But I do like what it's trying to do. I just have a hard time connecting to it. I think it's one of those books that when I finish the series, it's all going to kind of come together in my head. Kind of like The Magicians, even though I enjoyed The Magicians a lot more than I'm enjoying the process of reading the His Dark Materials series. And I really do want to watch the show. I think they're making it a show on BBC, I want to say. So I think that's going to be really good too, and that's part of the reason why I'm motivated to read it. So ultimately, I like what it's trying to do. I like certain elements of it, but I can't quite connect to it, so I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book I read this month was A Crown of Wishes by Roshni Chokshi. This is the companion book to A Star-Touched Queen, which I've talked about a lot here on my channel as it's a Hades and Persephone retelling. This is the companion series. It follows the main character, Maya's sister, from that story and what she's going through and everything, and it's completely separate, but it follows her going into the kind of other world and focusing on a lot of Indian mythology again. She gets kind of wrapped into this tournament with this other character who is dubbed the Fox Prince, which you guys know how we feel here about Fox Princes and the smart, conniving, snarky princes. So she gets kind of roped into this tournament of wishes that takes place in the magical part of society, and she has to kind of go into there and kind of battle these almost mythical stories and stuff. So it's really cool. It feels very different from the first book, but still in the same vein. Roshni's writing is gorgeous. She has that very flowery kind of Laini Taylor-esque writing that I just love, and that works so well for this kind of story and this kind of mythology-based story. The characters were also really different than the characters in the first book, but in a wonderful way. I think when I talked to her about this book, she talked about these two characters kind of being like Scarlet and Rhett from Gone with the Wind, and I definitely get that. They have this kind of bantery relationship that's just so funny, and just they really play off one another a lot, and they're both very strong, snarky characters who are just really wishing for their own freedom, and it was just a fun ride. I was actually reading this while playing Mass Effect, which is hard because it took me a long time to read this book, but not because I wasn't enjoying it, because I was taking so many breaks to play video games. So the fact that I still really enjoyed this, even though I was taking a lot of breaks from it, speaks a lot to how good it was. I enjoyed the world building even more in this book because it's much more about kind of like the world and what's going on around them and stuff. There was a lot more of that like mythology element to it, which I really enjoyed, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. So that is it for the books that I read in March. Comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them and what's your favorite book that you read in March was. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!